What's up guys, DreamcastGuy here, talking today about the Panasonic 3DO. This console, released in 1993, nearly changed gaming forever, but instead was a colossal flop. Now, how could it have changed gaming forever? Well, at this time, several people were in the games race. Atari was a major figure, Nintendo and Sega were head-to-head, and people were all vying to see who could fill that fourth slot. Well, that's when EA stepped up to bat. In 1993, Trip Hopkins had the idea of creating a universal game console, a game console that's not owned by one company, but that anybody can make. Much like how DVD players or cassette players can be made by anybody, really, anybody could make games, and anybody could just put them out on any console. That was his master vision. So he created the 3DO Interactive. This was going to be a game console that ran on discs, had interesting 3D graphics, and was actually kind of ahead of its time. The main problem was not enough people bought into the idea. Many people thought this isn't going to work, and they couldn't get any other major titles on board. They wanted to get Nintendo on board or Sega on board, so that basically they could then have a landslide of third-party developers jump on with them. So my thought is this: what if Nintendo had signed on? At this time, they were pretty deep into the development of the Nintendo 64. They were still in talks at the time with Sony during 1993. Sony was talking about doing a disc player for the Nintendo 64, which later on they ended up saying, screw you Nintendo, we're just going to make our own console, which led to the PlayStation. But what if it hadn't? What if instead the joint venture between PlayStation and Nintendo had joined forces with the 3DO? What if we'd had the Nintendo Panasonic 3DO produced by Sony? All the great games we know and love, like Final Fantasy VII, would have come out on the 3DO. We may have even had it earlier because they would have had an extra 2 or 3 years with the hardware. With the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn both being released in 1995 and the Nintendo 64 being released in 1996, I can't help but think, what if they had scrapped that? What if they had taken out all the production time and instead just focused on games? Instead of half the development team in all of Nintendo working on getting the N64 out and the other half working on the launch titles like Mario 64. What if instead we'd had Mario 3DO? It would have been a launch title for the 3DO, displaying new 3D graphics like we'd never had them before. In fact, we could have had a much longer Mario game than we'd ever had before. Every previous Mario title up to this point had been limited by cartridges. We didn't get a single disc-based Mario game until the GameCube came out. That is a massive gap of time. What if instead of them trying to tinker with, let's face it, the really rigid and hard programming structure of the Sega Saturn, what if Sega had instead lumped all their resources together, took all their loyal third-party developers, and jumped on board also with the 3DO? So now, the 3DO is getting a massive head start. This would be 1993, and we would have all of the major companies working together on just games, on just hardware. This would be a very interesting thought. Then they wouldn't have to worry about how can we get extra bytes or graphics or cost efficiency out of this console, and instead they just worry about console buy-in. How many games can we put out that are high quality so that the most people per capita, per household, will buy a 3DO? Now, let's even think more rhetorically than that. Think about the fact that as technology advances, they would release more 3DOs. Say that they combined all the technology that was originally going to be developed for the N64, the Sega Saturn, and the PlayStation, and what if they'd taken all of their own research and development and combined it together with the 3DO Interactive? So let's say 1996, instead of the Nintendo 64 getting launched, we would have seen the 4DO. The 4DO Interactive, a new console that is an upgraded sequel to the 3DO, already having massive buy-in. We could have Mario and Sonic at the Winter Olympic Games released in 1997. We could have a massive leap in technology. Now, since we have one mega conglomerate, EA, which, already, that even tastes bad in my mouth, but EA, owning the entire console shares, could just worry about constantly improving it. They wouldn't even have to worry about games. So let's say All these companies have teamed up, the year 2000 rolls around, and now DVD technology is out. So the year 2000 is when we originally got the Sony PlayStation, but instead, say we get the next version of the 3DO or 4DO. Let's supposedly call that the Ultra Interactive, because originally the project for Nintendo 64 was called the Nintendo Ultra 64. So let's say instead they call it the Ultra Interactive. The Ultra Interactive is now the monolith of gaming. At this point, if you want to make a game, you gotta go through EA. All of its major figureheads are still there. Say you want an Atari game, you want to play, I don't know, Enter the Matrix. I don't know why you would, that game was broken as hell. But if you wanted to play Enter the Matrix, you would play that on the Ultra Interactive. All games would exist on one format. All DLC would be on one format. All fighting games would be on one format. It's a very interesting concept that I think would have irreversibly changed the entire game's medium. For better or for worse, I honestly cannot say, because typically monopolies never end well. Like, think about how many years Apple held the smartphone market balls in its hand. Well, now that we've wrestled it away, we're in a new revolution of smartphones. Well, what if it had taken years and years and years for another company to punch their way out from underneath the 3DO shadow? It's an interesting concept, and although we'll never get to see this fully play out, it's fun to think about. I'd like to think what console would possibly beat such a massive conglomerate like EA and the Ultra Interactive. Well guys, this is just my fun game theory about what could have happened in the gaming revolution. This video was directly inspired by Adam Korlick's 3DO overview video. Be sure to go to his video from this link and leave a comment letting him know DreamcastGuy sent you. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked this video, maybe check out my last video. Please subscribe, and if you want, share this somewhere with your friends.